All right, looks like we're live. Welcome, guys. Had a little technical difficulties. I think we're back on the straight and narrow now. Fingers crossed. Um, so, again, my name is Joe Walsh. I am running for Hendricks County Commissioner. I'm going to be moderating this event. It's a virtual Boost the Conversation brought to you by the Hendricks County Democratic Boosters. We're going to be talking to two great state Senate candidates tonight, Mr. Stan Albaugh and Mr. Pete Cowden. I thank you guys for being here today. Hopefully, we are running live this time instead of like last time. And if we are, we'll get moving. The point of the event for us is for the voters to meet Stan and to meet Pete, get to know them, hear about their platform, why they're running, and then even take some questions and so we can get some answers out there for the stuff because there's a lot going on right now, as many of you know. So without any further ado, Pete, floor is yours.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you to the boosters for putting this on, and thank you, Joe, for moderating. Um, I was raised on the west side of Indianapolis. My dad was a small machine shop owner. My mom was a dietitian. And I'm running for office for two reasons. The first is that I believe in service to my community. My parents raised my sisters and I to not measure our worth by dollars and cents alone, but on how we served the community. And that lesson has stuck with me my entire life. The second is that I've shared many of the challenges that we've faced over the last 15 years. My dad worked his butt off to make his small manufacturing business a success. We used to have family dinners in his shop so the machines would keep going. But by the time the 2008 economic collapse hit, he had to lay off his workers and close his doors. And as I got a little bit older, I realized that that wasn't just a problem that my family and I faced. It was a problem that was repeated throughout the entire Midwest and the entire country. And it really showed me that the American dream is in peril. You can do what you're told to do. You can get an education, work hard, be an entrepreneur, and decisions out of your control can undermine you. My first step in service to the community was as an Army Ranger. I joined the military in 2006. And as a Ranger, I was ready and willing to fight America's enemies up close and personal. But instead, I was sent to a war in Iraq that was based on lies. Lies told by politicians who got rich while my brothers and sisters fought and bled. After a couple more combat deployments, I had to be medically retired from the military. A series of catastrophic injuries finally caught up with me. And that process took a really long time, took almost 3 years. Military's response during that time was to put me on a high level of opioid painkillers. And I was just angry. I didn't think my service mattered, and I didn't think the government gave a damn about me or my family. And then our Senator, Joe Donnelly, stepped in and broke up the bureaucracy and got my medical retirement moving and sent me home. And what that showed me was that government can have a negative impact on one's life, but the right person at the right time can also change one's life for the better. And so I'm running because I think we need more people in office who have experienced the repercussions of poor policy, have gone through some of these things, and because I want to make sure that government is that force for good in people's lives and not for the negative. So again, I'm happy to be here and I'm looking forward to the questions. Thank you.
It's your turn, Stan.
Hello, my name is Stan Albaugh. I'm a retired Air Force colonel with over 30 years of active duty service, and I'm running for the Indiana State Senate in District 24. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up poor. My father had a lung taken out when I was in the 5th grade and then died when I was in the 12th grade, just before I graduated from high school. Mom stayed home and took care of Dad. The neighbors bought groceries. We kind of skimmed and got by. I didn't realize until much later in life why Mom had always given us a piece of candy about 20 minutes before dinner. And it was so that the 4 of us kids wouldn't come to the dinner table and realize there just wasn't enough food to eat. Well, after high school, in order to escape poverty, I joined the military. I was enlisted in the Air Force Security Forces, and I found myself guarding nuclear-loaded B-52s in Glasgow, Montana. The temperature had fallen to 72 degrees below zero wind chill factor. And at 65 degrees below zero, they took the dogs in and left me out. When you realize where you are on the food chain and it's below the canine, that's pretty depressing. Now, I did have one thing going for me, and it was how much my parents had emphasized the importance of education. Even though I didn't listen when I was younger, because I was caught up in all the drama and everything associated with my father dying, that foundation gave me enough to, I could realize that I could either accept the life that I had to be left out after the dogs were taken in, or I could educate myself out of it and do something about it. I continued to go to night school and eventually graduated from a state university. After I got my bachelor's degree, I went back into the Air Force and I flew B-52s, B-1s, and E-3s. I had a very successful career and subsequently retired as a full colonel in the Air Force. That's the reason why I believe with every fiber of my being that public education is the best way for the middle class, the working poor, and the poor to achieve the American dream. So why am I running? I'm running to protect or to help public education. The things that our state legislature has done with public education since we passed the property tax cap in 2008 is just horrendous. We passed the referendum here in Avon in 2018, and I supported that. But I also didn't like it because what it boiled down to was the legislature not doing their job and funding the education at the appropriate level. And I knew I could either sit at home and be upset about the way the state government was running, or I could run for office and do something about it. When I initially launched my campaign in January, I had 3 principal planks to my platform: education, jobs in the economy, and infrastructure. Obviously, since then, we've had a 100-year pandemic that has occurred. And then on top of that, the killing of numerous individuals, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the number of people killed and the amount of social injustice, and certainly those items have been added to the platform. With that being said, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have and see where this goes. Thank you.
All right. Well, we'll start with questions. I'll let Stan answer the first question first, and I'll let Pete, and we'll kind of flip-flop back and forth. So, Stan, how do you feel about the vote-by-mail process available in Indiana, and do you think we should expand and extend it into general elections, especially with the anticipated COVID surge this fall?
Because we know so little about the COVID, and we're learning more every day, it makes obvious sense that people should not have to choose between exercising their constitutional rights and voting for their elected officials and their health. We passed vote by mail approval and stuff for the primary. Clearly, we should do it again. Now, there are several states that already allow that nationally. There's a group of states, which Indiana is one, that also allows absentee voting. I really would like the legislature to approve the vote by mail. But for those of you that don't realize it, there are a number of reasons why you are able to do absentee voting in lieu of. For example, if you're just going to be out of the area or away for the 12-hour period from 6 to 6 when voting goes on, you can request an absentee. If you have any disability, you can request an absentee. If you're 65 or over, you can an absentee. There's a whole list of items there on the website, but those are the principal ones that are going to apply to most people. Don't hesitate to use that if you're concerned, if you're giving care for somebody, if you're sick or not able to vote. Vote by mail makes positive sense, but there's a lot of reasons why the other side doesn't want to allow it to happen. And it has to do with the amount of turnout that we just had in the primary. But exercise your constitutional right. Definitely vote. Look at the website and see if you apply for absentee voting, and do that if possible, so that you don't have to expose yourself or to the risk, because we don't fully understand what type of backlash there's going to be from COVID in the fall.
Pete, same for you. How do you feel about the vote by mail process that's available in Indiana? Do you think we should expand and extend it to the general election, especially with the anticipated COVID surge this fall?
Yeah, we absolutely should have no fault absentee voting this fall. I mean, from everything I read and what medical professionals are saying, it's very likely that we have a resurgence in COVID cases this fall. And in a lot of states, it hasn't even plateaued or started to go down, right? So as Stan said, people should not have to choose between their constitutional rights and their health. Furthermore, in Marion County, we had a really hard time during the primary. There was lines that were sometimes hours long. I mean, the virus is one thing, but the EMTs had to be called here at some voting locations because elderly people were falling out from the heat. It also is counterproductive to have people waiting in hour-long lines when you're trying to socially distance. And that was with a primary turnout that I believe was somewhere around 14 or 16%. We're hoping to get to 60 or even 70% turnout in the general election in November. We can't have a repeat of what happened in the primary election. So not only do I think that they absolutely need to do no fault absentee voting for the fall, I think that they need to go ahead and fund a program that will send an application to every registered voter, explain to them how the process works, because, you know, not very many people in Indiana absentee vote. We don't have a very broad program, and that makes it very, very challenging because it's a somewhat confusing process. So we need to simplify that process. We need to make sure that things like the ballot getting to the post office postmarked by election day is enough to make sure that counts, right? So, you know, by and large, I'm all for making voting easier, and particularly when you're talking about a health risk. We've got to make sure that people can exercise their right to vote and stay healthy. So I think they should fully fund it and make it no fault.
Awesome. All right. Well, Pete, you get this first one. The next question. Do you support a minimum wage increase, and what do you think that wage should be?
Yeah, I absolutely support a minimum wage increase. And I think that the first thing we got to do is start with our teachers. You know, as Stan said, we've had a pandemic. We've had upheaval in our streets because of systemic racism in our criminal justice system and our policing. And, you know, that has kind of overshadowed the massive rallies we had from teachers who are fed up with the lack of pay. I think with the pandemic, people have also realized just how much teachers add as parents have had to you know, educate their own kids and be, you know, full-time daycares as well and try to work. I know it's been a heavy burden on a lot of people. But I also don't think that raising the minimum wage goes far enough in the environment that we're now in, right? We have millions and millions of people out of work. And as great as the free market economy is, it's not going to be able to meet this challenge by itself. You know, entrepreneurs are not going to create 15, 20, 30 million jobs in a matter of months once we can get back to a new normal. So the government has to be even more involved in raising the minimum wage. They have to come up with programs that are going to get our economy back on track. And even before this pandemic, you know, we weren't doing great. The cost of living keeps going up while wages were stagnant. We have more inequality than we've had since just before the Great Depression. So absolutely raise the minimum wage, but we need to go even further. We need to make sure we have programs to make sure that the government partners with entrepreneurs in the free market to get our economy back on track after this pandemic.
All right, Stan, your turn. Do you support a minimum wage increase, and what do you think that wage should be?
Well, obviously, Pete and I agree on an awful lot of things since we're running on the same side of the ticket. So you're going to hear a lot of the same things that Pete just said, maybe phrased a little bit differently, but I think the meaning's the same. Clearly, we both agree with the idea of raising the minimum wage. It's easy for me to say raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour because that's the rhetoric that has generally run across the national level. The reality is if you look back at the Economic Policy Institute, they make reference to the productivity gap. Since the early 70s, worker productivity in the United States is actually up 77%, and worker pay is up 12%. With that being said, if worker pay would match productivity, the minimum wage now would be over $20 an hour, not $7.25. So raising it to minimum to $15 an hour to me is a very easy thing to do, and I think that that's people that are working, I mean, high school kids at $15 an hour. We also know the impact that it's going to have on the economy, because let's face it, it's the top 20% that hold all of our national wealth. The middle class, the working poor, and the poor live payday to payday. They spend virtually everything that they make. Adding that for them is also an instant boost to the economy because of that new refrigerator that they've been fighting with, or the problem that they're having with the car, or all of those types of issues. They now, for the first time, have a little extra money to be able to go out and get those things fixed or have those things. And what is that? It's a boost in spending to the economy. And like Pete said, we've got 30 million people out of work. I'm sorry, I also have a master's degree in business. Supply side economics doesn't work. Demand side economics works. When there's a demand, entrepreneurs will figure out a way to grow their companies and to grow the economy and to be able to fill that demand. And so now some people, naysayers, like to say, well, gee, if you raise the minimum wage, then the cost of XYZ, put in any noun that you want, is going to be exorbitant. But the reality is, if you look at McDonald's webpage, for example, they talk about the cost associated with, if you raise the minimum wage from $7.50 to $15 an hour, it raises the cost of a Big Mac 68 cents. That is nothing. 68 cents. But people like to exaggerate it. Well, it's going to go up dollars. It's not going up dollars. And it has there's an economic multiplier associated with that money and those raises. So absolutely, I would raise the minimum wage. $15 an hour is a minimum. You have to realize that $15 an hour only equates to $30,000 a year. $30,000 a year is, $30,000 below the national median household income. That means if you have a married family making $15 an hour, they're both working full time to meet the national median household income. Who's taking care of the kids? Who's raising the family? Who's doing the things, the values that we value as Americans? So it's easy. So yes, raise the minimum wage at least to $15 an hour. The hope that the impact that would have on other people's salaries is a high tide raises all boats, so that other people that are making closer to that, their wages would also go up, or they would be looking to find another job. And so hopefully it raises those salaries too, certainly in the teens and 20s and maybe up into the 30s, to help bolster our economy. Absolutely, it's a very easy yes.
We had a good answer on that one. I think you guys are a little passionate about that one. That's good. All right. So next question, we'll start with Stan on this one. How do you suggest we approach addressing police reform? It's a big topic going on right now. Can you give me one example of a program you'd support or try to create?
Police reform, that's difficult, but I can give you a couple that come to mind. I am appalled when I see the video of George Floyd being murdered. And I don't know how to call it anything other than murder. Having been in the military police, I was certainly trained in the appropriate use of force for the military police. On, yes, you can use lethal force to protect your life and the life of somebody else. The idea that officer stayed on his neck for almost 3 minutes after no pulse, how is that possibly a threat? How is that neutralizing a threat? To me, it's absolutely nothing but murder. But what really bothers me is 3 officers that are sworn to protect and serve, standing there watching a crime in commission. I would absolutely want to pass legislation that requires those officers to intervene to stop that crime in commission, even though it's being done by another police officer, because that was clearly excessive use of force. And I don't think anybody has a problem identifying it as that. I've spoken to some lawyer friends, and I'm told that there are some counties, some areas where they actually have laws that say you cannot interrupt the performance of a police officer's duties. So for them to, only he is capable of determining the appropriate level of force. I completely disagree with that. I would pass legislation to change that. Certainly any civilized human being can look at that and see that as excessive force. And so they should have inserted themselves. They should have stopped him from killing George Floyd. Absolutely. That's an easy thing to fix. And I think it should be done with legislation immediately. Yes, absolutely outlawing chokeholds and a number of things that police have done, like the murder of Eric Gardner. Once again, another individual that showed no force, no violence, no threat to the other person, other than the idea that it was a smaller, shorter individual that was a little bit intimidated by Eric Gardner's size. And other officers standing there watching those crimes happen. I don't understand that. They're supposed to be upholding the law and protecting and defending its citizens.
Same for you, Pete. How do you suggest we approach addressing police reform? And can you give me one example of a program you'd support or try to create?
Yeah, I certainly agree with Stan on the duty to intervene. That George Floyd murder was very difficult to watch. And after learning more and more about the situation, the officer should have not been on the force in the first place. I think the first thing you got to do is change the culture. You hear a lot about police officers being warriors. Well, they're not warriors, right? As an Army Ranger, I was actually at war with enemies of the country, right? And it's a completely different experience, and it's also a completely different mission than what the police are supposed to be doing. And so I think what we have to do is we have to shift the culture from a warrior culture to a guardian culture, right? They're not supposed to be infringing on people's freedoms. They're supposed to be de-escalating situations, not using lethal force. And so we have to start getting that attitude across. Now, as far as specifics go, first thing is body cams, right? We should have had them already. It's very simple. It's advantageous to the community and the police officer both, because you can see what actually happened in the situation. So as a state senator, I would fund a grant program to make sure that even smaller municipalities that maybe can't afford things like body cams are still able to equip their officers with it. You need more police of color so that the neighborhoods and the communities that they are policing look like them. I think we need to go back to actual beat policing, where they get out of their vehicles, they go meet the people in the community, they go talk to them, they hear about their challenges and their needs, and then try to meet those needs, right? We don't want, particularly now that cops are under so much scrutiny, we don't want them just getting into their cars and not leaving them, right? Banning chokeholds, of course. And I think we also need to have a conversation about what exactly we want police enforcing. I mean, you hear all the time that X and X situation shouldn't be a death sentence. Well, it's true. Do we really need cops pulling people over because their tags are expired and then possibly getting into a situation that escalates and requires force? I mean, that's something that can be handled through a different branch or just waited on. But I also think that one of the biggest things is that we can't talk about reforming police without talking about reforming our criminal justice system, right? I don't want all citizens to think that it is a good idea to fight the police when they're under arrest. But I would like all citizens to think that even if they're being arrested, they're going to get a fair shake when they get in front of our criminal justice system. So one of the first things I would do is decriminalize cannabis. I mean, when you talk about systemic racism, one of the things I point to over and over again is how many black folks are arrested for cannabis versus white folks, when every study shows that they consume at the exact same rate. So it's blatant, right? And I think almost all Hoosiers agree now that it's a harmless crime, if a crime at all. For many people, it offers significant health benefits. And most police officers I talk to, by the way, think it's a waste of their time to be policing cannabis. So that's the first thing I do. And then we have to continue to look at our criminal justice system, as well as probation and parole and things like that, and whether or not we're trying to punish people or set them up for a better life. Because I think if we want people to feel better about their interactions with the police, they got to feel like they're going to get a fair shake in our criminal justice system.
That's good. Next question. We'll start with Pete on this one. This is one that I've been seeing a lot on social media from elected officials. I know here in Hendricks County, they're starting to tackle this at the town and the county level as well. So the state has definitely been talking about this. We saw the governor this week talking about it. What do you propose to make up for the lost tax revenue due to COVID?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I think that they're always talking about their rainy day fund, right? This is the time to use it. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Second thing really is that we got to stop passing out taxpayer money to large multinational corporations like it's candy, right? Here in where I live, in Speedway, Indiana, the town of Speedway gave millions of dollars in tax breaks that really won't be repaid to get a new hotel built on Main Street. Well, that hotel has been sitting there as a skeleton without anybody working on it for over 6 months now. And I haven't heard a word about getting the taxpayers back their millions of dollars that they spent to get that contractor to take that. So that's just one example here in my neighborhood, but I'm sure that there are examples all over the district and all over the state. So I think the biggest things we got to stop giving away our taxpayer money to corporations that don't pay a living wage and don't benefit the community. And then we have to look at which ones we're giving money to that are not following up with their end of the bargain, and we've got to start taking that money back. That's what I would do to try to make the budgets match a little better.
Good. Stan, your turn. What do you propose to make up for the lost tax revenue due to COVID?
Well, once again, I agree with everything that Pete had to say. We've got a $2 billion rainy day fund. I don't know how much more rain we can possibly get than a 100-year pandemic. This is absolutely the time to use that if there ever is a time. On top of that, I also agree with what Pete is saying about some of the abatements that people have not followed through or not done their part. And we need to recapture or regain that money back. But there are other things that we can also look at. There are kind of priorities on how we spend some of our money. And one of the example I'm going to say is personally, I am not a real fan of the way the lottery ticket money is distributed across the state. The latest year that I could find where there are numbers on that is 2013. And so these numbers are significantly less than what they are today. But the Police and Firemen Retirement Fund, which is supposed to be paid for out of that, gets about $30 million a year, 2013. And then the Teachers Retirement Fund got $30 million. And then the Build Indiana Fund got $165 million. What is the Build Indiana Fund? It's just free money that the state passes out to the counties, and how it's distributed. It seems to be magic and mirrors. It gets a little bit lost in the process on exactly how that money gets distributed, and without requirements or associations with how that money gets used. In my mind, there's certainly room to recapture a fair amount of that money and use it more appropriately instead of as a slush fund just passed around the state based on political favors or who's making contributions. There are setting a priority on how we spend our money is a much bigger difference between where I sit and the other side of the aisle. Some of the things that I look at, well, for an example, education. When I look at education, they look at education or paying teachers as an expense. I personally view it as an investment. By being able to invest in that education and being able to educate Hoosiers as our economy changes from a global manufacturing economy, it's in the process of changing to a knowledge-based economy. And by 2025, we expect that more than 2/3 of all the jobs are going to require advanced skills training or a college education. Advanced skills training, a journeyman plumber, electrician, high wire guy, all those types of things that we certainly can't live without, or advanced skills training. But the reason why we can't attract jobs to Indiana, those better, higher paying jobs, to help make up some of this deficit, is because of that Indiana brain drain that we currently have. And that has to do with the lack of us not prioritizing funding at the university level. And so our universities have prioritized out-of-state students to come in to make up that difference. Now, the problem with that is they brag for every 100 students that leave the state, 160 come in to go to college. But the 100 that leave the state stay out because they find better paying jobs out of the state. 160 go home because there's better paying jobs at home. So prioritizing how we spend some of the money going forward so that we can benefit Hoosiers and our economy, so that we can attract better companies, info systems, Salesforce, companies like that need qualified, educated employees that, by the way, pay higher than average salaries. That will certainly increase money into our tax base to help make up some of this difference, and we can rebuild our rainy day fund as we use it now for this 100-year pandemic.
Okay. So we're going to do a question that was asked online. So this is a good one here. How do we begin to repair our agricultural trade agreements to generate higher prices for Hoosier prices for corn, soybeans, or livestock? We'll start with Stan on this one.
That's a hard one. This is certainly a hard one for me. I did not grow up in a rural or farming community. It's going to take a fair amount of time for us to repair the problems that we have had. And some of those problems, and I hate to I don't want to really get into national politics, but it runs into the way from the national level, we have leveraged some of those relationships to get other things that the federal government has thought that we needed more, instead of the example being the taxes. I'm losing the word, that we pay on the fees on stuff
Tariffs.
coming in.
Tariffs.
There you go. That's the word. Yeah, on the tariffs coming in, thinking that China's paying those tariffs, or those are all things that we pay locally, and then what we end up doing is losing market share. Unfortunately, a fair amount of that market share may be lost for quite some time. I don't know if we're going to be able to renegotiate or redo that to get that market share back to be able to sell that. Clearly in the United States, based on some of the technology and some of the things that we do, we supply a fair amount of food to feed the world with only a few competitors fighting us for that market share. But we've had difficulty, or some of the things that we've done at the national level. Things that we can do at the state level, I don't know. I'm going to have to say that whoever asked this question, I would be interested for your input or feedback to help educate me. Like I said, I spent my entire adult life in the military. I can talk national security. I can talk military. I can talk those sorts of things. I'm reasonably informed about. Agriculture is not one of them. So this is something I would need to talk to somebody, an expert or people in the field to be able to help me with this. Sorry if that's not what you wanted to hear.
I mean, and that's a good thing to sit there and say, if you don't know, you don't know. But sometimes it does help us that we can keep educating ourselves on these topics. I'm going to pose a question to you, Pete.
Yeah.
How do we begin to repair agriculture? Yeah, even if you need a question, go ahead.
Yeah, well, for one, I'm going to echo the last thing that Stan said as well. I mean, the slogan of my campaign is "Listen, Serve, Unite," right? And there's a very good reason that I put "listen" as the first pillar. It's because I don't claim to be an expert at everything. I do, however, view my role and life generally as going out and finding the people who are dealing with it on the ground and hearing about their experience and what they need, and then doing what I can in my position to get them what they need. Right. That's leadership 101. I'm sure Stan would agree. Right. You got to give your people the equipment and the tools that they need to succeed. And that's how I view all of this stuff. A couple things that do come to mind is it's just a tough situation to be in, because I agree that we have to get tougher on China. They do not play fair. And so there are things that we're going to have to do to make sure that we can even the playing field, right? Because while free trade is great, when only one country's buying into it, really, it doesn't work all that well. And China's been a state capitalist economy for a long time. It's nowhere near a free market economy. However, our farmers are suffering gravely because of the actions of the federal government and President Trump. So for one, we got to keep up the subsidies, right? A lot of people don't like to hear that, but it's just a fact. When U.S. farmers can create so much supply that there's not nearly the demand for the market worldwide, and it would press down the price to the point that they're not making any money. I mean, that's why the U.S. government gives agricultural subsidies. So we got to keep that up. I would also like to find as many new markets as we can, right? So that the barriers go down for entry for us so that our farmers can sell to other places. The only other thing that comes to mind is that, I have been told and I have read that farms over the last 50 years have been consolidated a lot, like many things in our economy, right? When I was a kid, and I'm only 31 years old, right? So not that long ago, I remember a lot more mom and pop shops for whatever it was. These days there's only mom and pop restaurants. Everything else is Walmart, Amazon, etc. And so it would make sense to me that the same thing may be happening in our agricultural sector, as I've been reading. So I think that a lot of Americans are looking not only at the price of their food, but the quality of their food. And one way to gain more market share may be to break up some of the giant conglomerate farms and start making them a little more family-owned farms that are diversified more, right? So it's not as much factory farming. Though I realize that there is a necessity to that because populations are growing, and we have to make sure people get fed. So those are a few of the things that come to mind for me. But again, I echo what Stan said. Right now, I always love a good conversation with somebody that's telling me some things that I don't know about. And as a state senator, I would love it even more. So always happy to be educated on subjects that I'm not an expert in.
Well, good, because we're going to stick with the rural theme right now. We're going to keep going. We'll start with Peak. I figured that'd be nice and fun, right, you guys? See, I grew up in a very rural area. When I went outside my front door, it was nothing. It was a cornfield this year, then a soybean field next year. But we'll talk about that later. So with the expected resurgence of COVID-19 this fall, if you were in office, how would you help students in rural and poor communities access online curriculum when they don't have high-speed internet and they don't have computers?
Well, that to me is a pretty simple solution. We have to create grants and funding systems to make sure that rural communities have access to the internet. I mean, frankly, it kind of boggles my mind that we're not there yet already, right? This has been a problem that we've known about up to this point, that rural communities don't have this access, and yet we've dropped the ball. I see it as a public-private partnership, making sure that these places have the access that they need to the internet. And then as far as the computers go, like Stan said, I'm really not sure at what point we started viewing education as simply an expense. This is an investment in our communities. This is an investment in our children. And so I would simply make sure that the schools are funded enough to to give the children who need a computer. Because what other choice do we have, frankly, right? If we're not going to have kids in school and we're going to do online learning because we don't want people to get sick and die, then we have to fund these things.
Good answer. I like that. So for you, Stan, also with the expected resurgence of COVID-19 this fall, if you were in office, how would you help students in rural and poor communities access online curriculum when they don't have high-speed internet and they don't have computers?
I agree with what Pete had to say. I would even go a little bit further. Personally, I believe that in 2020, high-speed internet ought to be a utility. I know that might not be popular for some people for me to say that, but the idea that we have kids that went home and did online classes this last term, and then were not able to because they don't have high-speed internet at their house, that is just ridiculous. It baffles the mind on how we expect them to learn or to grow. I also agree that we currently provide, in a lot of school districts, we provide books, or there's a book rental fee. I would tell you that my granddaughters that live in a neighboring state, live in Ohio, they were issued, and my children pay a fee, yes, like a book rental fee, to maintain those computers, and when they graduate, they are able just to keep the computer. But instead of being issued books, they are issued a computer. And on that computer has all of their textbooks. All that information is simply downloaded on it. So instead of carrying a big stack of books home back and forth, like I did when I was a child, they carry a computer back and forth, a laptop, and they have access to all of their textbooks. Then if you've got high-speed internet, you hook it up and you're able to do everything. This coming from a rural environment very much bothers or scares me, because really our education system, our public education system, is creating a two-class system as we speak. Because I know that here recently, the kids out in Putnam County having difficulty with online, trying to even finish up this school year because of COVID. But I can also tell you that I spoke with the superintendent in North Putnam last summer, and she told me in 2018, the graduating class had 118 students, and not one went to college. A graduating class, not one went to college. 7 joined the military, and all the rest sought employment through the Department of Workforce Development. Yes, the Department of Workforce Development doing a great job, and those things are necessary too. But the idea that nobody was able to dream high enough, dream big enough, see enough, because they can't get to a library because of the remote location, but can't look it up on the internet, don't have access to a computer so that they can see or dream outside of the situation in which they're in. How do they ever pull themselves up by the bootstraps and reach for the stars, do something bigger, greater, or better than the situation or the zip code in which they're born? That is very offensive to me. And it's offensive to me because of my background and where I grew up and how I grew up. So I think that high-speed internet should be a utility. I think it's time to do away with school books and just issue a laptop with the books on them. And with the combination of those, then those kids are then able to do that coursework if they're doing it online. They're able to look at other things, consider other options, learn things, be able to do some of that. Yes, there are absolutely problems on the internet associated with children. I'm not denying that, but it's also the library of 2020.
All right. This question is from Carol. We'll start with Stan. Would either of you, Stan, support removing police officers from public schools and replace them with coaches like life coaches and mandatory programs like Thinking, a cognitive behavior program to help 12 to 18-year-olds learn cognitive resolution skills?
Absolutely. There is problems associated in the school is more easily or more often identified and prevented with small class sizes when the teacher actually has the time to notice that Johnny is upset, and to be able to ask Johnny what is wrong, and Johnny having a relationship with that teacher, because they have a tendency, especially depending on their age, think of that teacher as a second parent and share information with them. And so when a child tells the teacher that Billy brought a gun to school today, or has brought a knife to school today, or is being bullied by this other child, they find out about it from another student. When you have class sizes that are small enough, 20, 25 is what I have a tendency to think, but I'm not an expert in education, but are small enough that the teacher can pay attention and be able to address those issues, then that prevents the need for having police officers on campus. For the other things that are beyond the scope of maybe security or things that teachers would find out, absolutely, I would think it better to have resource, not police resource, but what was the question you said? Counselors?
Yes, like life coaches.
Yes, life coaches are people that can help with other type of problems or situations that are found. Because with small class sizes, it's the teacher that's going to identify those problems where somebody has a gun, those problems when somebody is having something else and needs a life coach or needs that additional assistance, so that they can cope or get through a problem, so that they're able to actually enjoy the benefits of a public education.
Your turn, Pete. Would you support removing police officers from public schools and possibly replacing them with life coaches and mandatory programs like Thinking, a cognitive behavior program to help 12 to 18-year-olds learn cognitive resolution skills?
So on the second part, absolutely. I think that we have got to do a better job of teaching our children how to deal with their emotions and how to resolve conflict, because the idea that we're going to create a world that has no conflict in it is ludicrous. So we have to teach children how to resolve that. And I think studying that specifically is a wonderful idea. Now on the police officers in the schools, as far as them being inside the school, I would leave that up to the school itself, at least until they have another way to deal with some of the problems that the police officers have to deal with. And if that's life coaches, I think that would be great. However, I would still want officers on that property outside the school, because unless we're going to put guns inside the school, which I'm not a fan of, or really change our gun laws, it's just been shown that these schools are too soft of a target for insane, evil people. And so maybe the officers reside purely outside the school until asked otherwise. But I would want them still on that property, because of the terrible school shootings we've experienced in this country and in this state.
All right, got a couple more questions before we wrap it up here. One question we have is, this is from a lady. She says, she spent 28 years as a counselor and a case manager. They can tell you that offenders in prison cannot be forced to participate in drug and alcohol counseling or any sex offender treatment. Therefore, they come out of prison making no changes, and they have a recidivism rate of 60 to 90%. Would you support changes to the criminal code to enforce these issues?
So I guess by that she means forcing inmates to attend drug or alcohol classes.
Yes, or if it's a sex offended crime, that they have to go to that type of training or education as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as part of a holistic approach or reapproach to the way that we run our city jails and our county jails and our penitentiaries, because it's not working, right? Whoever that was that asked that question, I think sees this every day, right? Is the recidivism rate is really high, and we have to find better ways to make sure that people who make a mistake realize how the world is and how to get along in it and how to make a better path. I'm not claiming to be an expert on this either, but I do know that a lot of countries in this world and some states do it a lot better than we do. And so I'm sure it's something that's going to take talking to folks like the person who asked that question and doing more studying. But we can do a better job. And when that comes to drugs or alcohol, they should go to classes and seek treatment. And perhaps if it's just a drug or alcohol problem and there's no violent crime associated with it, they shouldn't be in the jail in the first place. That's what I would say.
Stan, same question to you. This is from the question is at a person who's been in the prison system, being a counselor or case manager for 28 years. They can tell you that offenders cannot be forced to participate in drug and alcohol rehabilitation or sex offender treatment. Therefore, they make no changes, and the recidivism rate is 60 to 90%. Would you support a change to the criminal code to address this?
Is that 60 to 90% for drug and alcohol, or does that also include 60 to 90% for the sexual assault?
I don't have an answer to that. It's just 60 to 90% recidivism rate.
Okay. Excuse me. I know. Excuse me. I know that Indiana only has one private penitentiary, and I know that private prisons, the recidivism rate tends to be very high because they lack these kinds of programs, and because they're not really interested in recidivism, they're not very interested in people reforming. But on one hand, I also feel like that, yes, it should be required for them to attend, and hopefully they will decide that they want to do better. But the knowledge that I have of people that have been involved in drugs and or alcohol, they almost have to get to a point themselves where they want to, and making them sit there, I'm not sure how effective that actually is. So I'm going to have to claim that once again, I don't know enough on the medical information, one way or the other, on which is best. Intuitively, I have a tendency to want to say, yes, it should be mandatory, and hopefully they'll accept it and want to want to become a better person. But at the same time, I also agree with Pete in that if it was a drug or an alcohol, other than was there another crime committed associated with that? I mean, that caused them to be incarcerated, or was it simply because they were a user and in possession of drug or alcohol, and as a result incarcerated? I do think of those types of things, drug and alcohol, as a medical condition, not a criminal condition. But I also know that, like I said, people have to want to do something about those type of problems before any type of change will actually occur. Well, when it comes to somebody with sexual assault, yeah, I don't know about that either. I don't know that somebody attending a class, that somebody that's been committed sexual assault, I don't know that you're going to reform them so that they don't do that again in the future. And so once again, I'm going to have to say that I'm going to need somebody to help educate me on this to form a definitive decision, because I can see arguments that go both ways, that having them sit through it will help. But also, I also know from my core that, gee, if somebody doesn't want to fix or change, then they don't fix or change. That has to come from some place inside of them. And so I need more information.
Fair enough. So here's to change topics just a little bit. We're getting long. We're getting our time is getting ready to run out. So I'll try to wrap this up soon. But one question that's still on everyone's mind, we're not talking a lot about right now, but what is still in the top topics. For you, we'll start with Stan. What is your position on climate change, and how do you think Indiana can address it? I know we are very low on the quality of life when it comes to pollution in the state of Indiana. So, what do you think is we as a state, not as a nation, but what we as a state can do to improve that?
Well, I'm going to answer that through the lens of education, because I personally believe that the next source of power right now, the big thing is, I mean, I own a Tesla, so yes, lithium ion batteries, okay, and that source of power and clean energy and what it does to help and improve the environment. But is that the end all? No. Do we need? Is there more technology and growth in clean, green energy development? Absolutely. Things that we can do in the state in regards to clean energy production certainly helps. Overturn that piece of legislation they passed last year on coal for those power generating plants, and do something that is clean or greener, or even kind of halfway in between, even if it's natural gas, which is certainly better than the coal plants that we're using. But the amount of manufacturing work and production in the entire green environment, I mean, there's a lot of high skilled jobs that can be developed and production, and we could actually lead the way in the country. Right now, for example, in lithium ion batteries, China owns like almost 60% of the market, and we're down to less than 20%. Most people feel like for cars or combustion engines that's the way of the future, or that's the things that are happening, and we don't even know the next development beyond that. Well, there are several other things that I read about online that are potential, that provide enough power to drive automobiles that are still in development or are still being tested and worked on. And so there's a lot of options there, and right with them comes manufacturing and development and the whole spectrum associated with it that would certainly boost our economy and help clean our state, because we could stop a lot of the polluting type manufacturing production that we're currently doing.
So for you too, Pete, what's your position on climate change, and what do you think that we can do, or what are your plans for Indiana to be able to address this?
To begin with, to be clear, my position is that climate change is real and that it is human caused. I'm not sure. I know some people are still having that debate, but that is where I stand. I approach this from the position of a kid who was really involved in scouting and has a true love of the outdoors, right? I grew up in Indianapolis. I grew up in the city. I still live in the city, and I really value my time outside of the city, whether it's under the stars that are so much brighter away from the city, or just walking through the woods. So the natural world calms me. I think it helps people learn, and it is very necessary in everybody's life. So pretty simply, I think that we have to expand our use of green energy, of renewable energy. We have to invest in technology. We also have to invest in learning more about virtuous cycles, right? Not just man-made technology, but perhaps organic technology that can help to make systems sustainable. And I know that our SPIA school at IU and IUPUI and the other campuses does a great job of that. We got to keep investing in that so we learn more, and then we actually got to put those things in place, right? And then lastly, I think that we need to have some real teeth in the laws that enforce pollution and other things. So I don't want to get to a point where we regulate things so much that companies can't breathe. So what I think we should do instead is make it so that if you're caught violating these laws, there are actual repercussions to it, not just a slap on the wrist. And we need to make sure that the organizations in the state that go out there and investigate these things and enforce these laws, actually do their job. And it's not just you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
All right, this is the last question. We've reached an hour. We don't want to go much beyond that. This one has to do with COVID-19. So if COVID-19 rises again, it's slowly kind of trickling down, but if we have another big resurgence, do you believe that statewide masks should be required?
And who's first this time? It's me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, required, but only if citizens have the opportunity to get one. Right? It should not be like the first time. We should not be caught off guard by this. So we should have enough masks to make sure that everybody has one, right? But I would not be for a situation where you make it illegal if you don't have a mask on and we're not providing anybody with masks, because some people may not know where to get them and some people may not be able to afford them, right? I work in a trustee's office. Some people are on incredibly thin budgets, right? They don't have $10, $15 for a mask or whatever it is. So I'm fine with a requirement to wear masks in public, but only if we also fund that so that people are afforded the opportunity to get one.
And for you, Stan, what are your stances of if there was a COVID resurgence, and do you believe that we should have statewide masks?
Actually, I would echo everything that Pete said. I could not agree with that statement more. Personally, I am fine with that requirement. But as we did some wellness checks and some calls, I mean, one gentleman disabled and lives off $900 a month, to include paying his rent, his utility, his food and medicines and those sorts of things. And he, of course, did not have access to the internet, did not have a computer. And when we contacted him, what he wanted to know, am I eligible to get one of the $1,200 checks coming from the government? Because he didn't have a way to find out. He didn't have a bank account, and the way he was so limited. And so there are those people that certainly exist. And so to say that, yes, you have to have a mask or something to be out, no, yes, I try to remember to wear a mask when I'm out anywhere where I'm going to be near somebody or go into a public place. And it's not, I recognize it's not for my protection, it's for the protection of the people around me. And it's just a matter of being polite and respectful of them. And for other people to do that, I think that is a reasonable thing to do. But to say that you have to spend your money to be able to do this, or else we're going to give you a ticket or arrest you or do something, no, I don't think that too, because that individual may be choosing between a mask and buying his medicine, or a mask or buying food or paying his rent, those sort of things. And so I agree with Pete 100%.
A little thing to add to that, I think Stan would probably agree with me. I don't want cops arresting anybody for not wearing a mask.
Right.
There's just no reason to do that. We've already seen how these situations can spiral. Emotions run high on things like this. I would not want police doing that. So what I would do instead is I would give every police officer a couple boxes of them, and they can hand them out to people who don't have them, and ask them to put them on. Beyond that, I think then, if they still refuse, then it becomes a property issue, right? Like the business can require them to put it on, and if they don't want to, then it's a private property. They have to leave. So yeah, I wouldn't want cops going around trying to arrest anybody for not wearing a mask.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Well, I want to thank you guys for your time tonight. It was really nice to listen to what you guys had to say. I'm going to do the shameless pitch for you both. PeteCowden.com, StanAlbaugh.com. Go on the sites, check what they have, especially if you're like me in a policy wonk. Also, if you have a couple extra dollars, you want to help out the campaigns, maybe get a sign. You know what you got to do, right? We're hoping to do more of these events in the future. Hopefully we'll get these two guys together again, talk about more things, because if you've been in America for the past, I don't know, couple of years, you'll notice that it'll probably change next month what's going on, because nothing is normal. And that's okay. But I want to really thank you guys for being here. And again, PeteCowden.com, StanAlbaugh.com. Thank you so much for watching tonight, and stay safe, Hendricks County.
Thank you.
Thank you.